The clock on the hospital wall showed 6:10 a.m. as the nurse finished her 12-hour night shift in the pediatric ward. She was tired but satisfied. It had been a good night. All her little patients were stable, and she had even managed to calm down a scared 5-year-old who couldn't sleep without his favorite teddy bear. She changed out of her scrubs in the staff locker room, thinking about the surprise waiting at home. Her husband, a Navy SEAL commander, wasn't supposed to return from his overseas mission for another 3 days. But he had called her yesterday with the good news: he was coming home early. She smiled at the thought of walking through their front door to find him there. Outside, the hospital parking lot was nearly empty. The early morning air was cool and crisp as she walked toward her car, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space. She didn't notice the black van parked in the shadows near the exit, its engine idling softly. Inside that van, 4 men watched her every move. They had been planning this for weeks, studying her routines, learning when she worked, when she left, and most importantly, when her husband was away. They thought they had found the perfect target, the wife of a wealthy military officer who was thousands of miles away on deployment. "That's her," the leader whispered to his team. "Remember the plan. Quick and clean, no mistakes." The nurse reached her car and fumbled for her keys in her purse. She was thinking about what to make for breakfast when she got home. Maybe pancakes. Her husband loved pancakes, especially with fresh blueberries. The van's sliding door opened silently. 2 men stepped out, moving quickly across the parking lot. They wore dark clothes and ski masks, their footsteps barely making a sound on the pavement. She sensed something was wrong a split second before they reached her. Maybe it was a sound, maybe it was instinct, but she turned around just as the first man grabbed her arm. "Don't scream," he hissed, pressing something hard against her side. "Get in the van, and nobody gets hurt." Her mind raced. Years of her husband's safety lectures flashed through her memory. "Stay calm," he always said. "Observe everything. Look for opportunities." She allowed herself to be led to the van, her nurse's training helping her stay composed despite the fear coursing through her veins. As they pushed her inside, she caught a glimpse of the license plate, memorizing the numbers automatically. Inside the van, the leader was already typing on a phone. "Sit down and be quiet," he ordered. "We're going to send a message to your husband." They tied her hands in front of her with rope, not too tight, she noticed. These men were nervous, amateur. They kept looking at each other for reassurance, their movements jerky and uncertain. The leader held up her phone, which they had taken from her purse. "Smile for the camera," he said sarcastically, snapping a photo of her sitting in the van. She watched as he typed out a message: "We have your wife. $500,000 in 24 hours, or you'll never see her again." He attached the photo and hit send, using her phone to message her husband. "Your military husband is about to get the shock of his life," the leader laughed. "Too bad he's on the other side of the world. By the time he can do anything, we'll be long gone with the money." The nurse remained silent, but inside, she almost felt sorry for these men. They had no idea what they had just done. They thought they were kidnapping a helpless woman whose husband was far away. They couldn't have been more wrong. Her husband had returned home at 3 a.m., wanting to surprise her. Right now, he was probably in their kitchen, making coffee and waiting for her to come home. In about 30 seconds, he would receive their message. These kidnappers had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had awakened a force they couldn't possibly understand, and their perfect plan was about to become their worst nightmare. The morning sun was just starting to peek through the kitchen windows as the commander stood at the counter, whisking eggs in a bowl. He had just returned from his mission overseas, surprising his wife by coming home 3 days early. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and he smiled, thinking about how happy she'd be to come home to breakfast after her long night shift at the hospital. His phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, expecting to see his wife's usual heading home message. Instead, his blood turned to ice as he read the words on the screen. "We have your wife. $500,000 in 24 hours, or you'll never see her again." Below the message was a photo that made his heart stop. There she was, his brave, beautiful wife, sitting in what looked like a van with her hands tied. Her nurse's uniform was wrinkled, and though her face showed fear, he could see that familiar strength in her eyes. For exactly 3 seconds, the commander stood frozen. Then, like a switch being flipped, his years of elite military training took over. His mind became crystal clear, emotions pushed aside, replaced by the cold precision that had made him one of the best in his unit. He set down the whisk and moved with purpose. First, he opened the special app on his phone, one that most people didn't even know existed. It was designed for situations exactly like this, allowing him to track his wife's phone location with military-grade accuracy. Within seconds, a blinking dot appeared on the map, moving slowly through the city streets. The commander rushed to his home office, where he kept his emergency gear. He pulled out a black duffel bag from a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside was everything he might need: communication devices, tactical equipment, and other tools of his trade. As he zipped up the bag, he was already dialing a number he knew by heart. "I need you," he said when his former teammate answered. They took her. That was all he needed to say. His friend, who now ran a private security company just 20 minutes away, understood immediately. "I'm bringing the team. Send me the coordinates." The commander was already moving toward his truck, his mind working like a computer. He calculated distances, planned entry points, and considered every possible scenario. These kidnappers had made a critical error. They thought he was still overseas. They had no idea they were dealing with someone who had spent years training for exactly this kind of situation. As he threw his gear into the truck, his neighbor called out a friendly greeting. The commander managed a quick wave, his face giving nothing away. To anyone watching, he might have looked like a man heading to the gym or running errands. But inside, he was a coiled spring, ready to unleash years of training and experience on whoever had dared to touch his family. He started the engine and pulled up the tracking app again. The dot was still moving, but slower now. They were probably getting close to wherever they planned to halt her. Good. That meant they wouldn't have time to set up properly, wouldn't have time to prepare for what was coming. As he drove, following the blinking dot on his screen, the commander's jaw was set in grim determination. He wasn't angry. Anger would cloud his judgment. Instead, he was focused, calculating, and absolutely certain of one thing. He would get his wife back, and these criminals would learn why you never, ever target a Navy SEAL's family. The tracking dot finally stopped moving. The commander checked the location, an old industrial area on the outskirts of town. Perfect. Isolated enough that the kidnappers would feel safe, but also isolated enough that no innocent bystanders would get in the way of what needed to be done. He pressed down on the accelerator, his truck eating up the miles between him and his wife. The kidnappers thought they had 24 hours to get their money. They had no idea their time was already running out. The hunter was awake, and he was coming for his prey. The black van pulled into an old warehouse on the edge of town. The building looked abandoned, with broken windows and peeling paint. It was the perfect hideout, or so the kidnappers thought. They had planned everything carefully, watching the nurse's schedule for weeks, learning her routines, waiting for the perfect moment when her husband was supposed to be thousands of miles away on deployment. As the van doors opened, the leader of the group felt confident. Everything was going according to plan. They had the wife of a wealthy military man, and soon they would have $500,000. Easy money, he thought, as he gestured for his men to bring their captive inside. The nurse stepped out of the van, her hands still tied in front of her. She looked scared, which made the kidnappers relax even more. What they didn't notice was how her eyes quickly scanned the area, taking in every detail: the rusty gate, the single security camera that wasn't even working, the layout of the building, and most importantly, how many men there were and what weapons they carried. "Move," one of the kidnappers growled, pushing her toward the warehouse door. She stumbled slightly but kept her balance. As they walked, she counted their steps, memorizing the path from the van to the door. Her husband had always told her that information was power, and right now she was gathering as much as she could. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit by a few hanging bulbs. Old machinery and empty crates were scattered around, creating shadows in every corner. The kidnappers led her to a wooden chair in the center of the main room and pushed her down onto it. "Tie her up good," the leader ordered. "We don't want any problems." As one of the men wrapped more rope around her arms in the chair, the leader pulled out his phone and grinned. "Your husband's probably just getting our message now," he said smugly. "Wonder how he'll feel knowing his precious wife is so far away while he's stuck overseas." The nurse remained silent, her eyes downcast, but inside she was almost smiling. If only they knew her husband had surprised her by coming home early. If only they knew he was probably already on his way. While the men celebrated their successful kidnapping, passing around bottles of water and congratulating themselves, the nurse's trained eyes spotted something on the floor. A rusty nail, half hidden under some debris. It was about 5 feet away from her chair. The leader walked over to her, feeling powerful and in control. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he said with false kindness. "As long as your husband pays up, you'll be home in no time. We're professionals. We've done our homework." The nurse finally looked up at him, and for a brief moment, the leader saw something in her eyes that made him pause. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something that made him uncomfortable. But he shook it off, chalking it up to his imagination. What the kidnappers didn't know was that the nurse wasn't just any military wife. Her husband had insisted on teaching her self-defense, escape techniques, and situational awareness. She had protested at first, saying she'd never need such skills, but he had been persistent. "You never know when knowledge might save your life," he had said. Now, sitting in this warehouse, she silently thanked him for every lesson. Slowly, carefully, she began working her bound hands, testing the ropes. The kidnappers were getting comfortable now, some sitting on crates, others leaning against walls, all of them relaxed and confident. They had no idea that their perfect plan was about to fall apart. The nurse's fingers found a weak spot in the rope. As the kidnappers joked and laughed among themselves, she worked quietly, patiently, knowing that her husband was coming and that she needed to be ready. The rusty nail on the floor called to her like a beacon of hope. Time was ticking, but not in the way the kidnappers thought. They believed they had 24 hours to get their money. They couldn't have been more wrong. Their first mistake was taking her. Their second mistake was underestimating her. And their biggest mistake, thinking her husband was far away. The clock on the wall showed 6:20 a.m. In just 2 minutes, their world would come crashing down. The commander's truck came to a quiet stop 2 blocks away from the warehouse. It was exactly 6:22 a.m., just 7 minutes after the kidnappers had taken his wife. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, his trained eyes scanning the area. The old industrial district was deserted at this hour, which worked in his favor. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to his former teammate. 2 minutes out, northwest corner. The response came instantly. Copy. 3-man team ready. Moving with practiced silence, the commander grabbed his gear bag and slipped out of the truck. He stayed in the shadows, moving from building to building until he had a clear view of the warehouse. The black van was parked outside, confirming he was in the right place. Inside the warehouse, the nurse had managed to work one hand freed from the ropes. She kept her movements small, not wanting to draw attention. The kidnappers were still relaxed, talking among themselves about how they would spend their share of the ransom money. Suddenly, she heard it, a soft bird whistle that seemed to come from outside. To anyone else, it would sound natural, just another morning sound. But to her, it was a signal she knew well. Her husband was here. Her heart raced, but she kept her face neutral. She began working faster on the remaining ropes, using the rusty nail she had managed to reach with her free hand. The kidnappers remained oblivious, too caught up in their celebration to notice their captive was almost free. The commander circled the building, noting every entrance and exit. He spotted an old electrical box on the side of the warehouse and smiled grimly. Perfect. He quickly located the main power line and prepared to cut it. Inside, the leader was opening another bottle of water when suddenly the lights went out. The warehouse plunged into darkness. "What happened?" One of the kidnappers shouted. "Probably just old wiring," another replied, but there was uncertainty in his voice. In the darkness, they heard the distinct sound of breaking glass from somewhere in the building. Then, silence. The nurse used the confusion to finish freeing herself. She slipped quietly off the chair and crouched low, remembering her husband's lessons about moving in the dark. The kidnappers were fumbling for flashlights, cursing and bumping into things. "Check the circuit breaker," the leader ordered. "And someone go see what that noise was." One of the men pulled out his phone to use as a light and headed toward the back of the warehouse. He never made it. There was a soft thud, then nothing. "Tommy," the leader called out. No response. The remaining kidnappers started to panic. They could feel something was wrong, but they couldn't see what was happening. Their confidence from minutes ago had evaporated completely. Another kidnapper moved toward the door, his phone light shaking in his trembling hand. He took 3 steps before a shadow seemed to materialize behind him. A hand covered his mouth, and he was pulled backward into the darkness. Not a sound was made. The nurse watched from her hiding spot behind some crates. She could barely make out her husband's form as he moved through the warehouse like a ghost. He was using techniques she had only heard about, taking down the kidnappers one by one without making a noise. The leader and the last kidnapper stood back to back now, their phones casting weak beams of light around them. They were breathing heavily, fear evident in every movement. "Who's there?" the leader shouted, trying to sound brave but failing. "Show yourself." The commander's voice came from the darkness, calm and controlled. "You made 3 mistakes today. You took my wife. You thought I was gone. And you thought you had time." The leader spun around, trying to locate the voice, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. His hands shook as he held his phone light, searching the shadows. In the 7 minutes since they had taken her, the kidnappers' perfect plan had turned into their worst nightmare. They had awakened something they couldn't understand or fight against. And now, in the darkness of their chosen hideout, they were about to learn why some targets should never be touched. The nurse smiled in the darkness. The hunters had become the hunted, and justice was about to be served. The warehouse had become a maze of shadows and fear. 2 kidnappers remained standing, their confidence shattered like the broken windows around them. The leader's phone light trembled as he tried to pierce the darkness, searching for his missing men. The commander moved silently through the warehouse, his years of training making him merely invisible. He had already neutralized 2 of the kidnappers using pressure points and holds that left them unconscious but unharmed. His priority was his wife's safety, and he needed to end this situation quickly and efficiently. The nurse, now completely free from her bonds, stayed low behind a stack of old crates. She watched as one of the remaining kidnappers broke away from the leader, heading in her direction. The man was clearly panicking, his breathing heavy and erratic. As the kidnapper approached her hiding spot, she remembered her husband's self-defense lessons. "Use their fear against them," he had always said. "A panicked opponent makes mistakes." The kidnapper rounded the corner of her hiding spot, his phone light sweeping across the floor. The nurse waited until he was close enough, then swept his legs out from under him with a move her husband had taught her. The man fell hard, his phone skittering across the concrete floor. Before he could recover, she grabbed his dropped phone and shone the light directly in his eyes, temporarily blinding him. Using another technique from her training, she pressed specific points on his neck that caused him to lose consciousness. The entire encounter took less than 10 seconds. The leader heard the commotion and spun around. "Mike, what's happening?" His voice cracked with fear. Silence answered him. Now alone, the leader backed up against a wall, his eyes wide with terror. He had entered this warehouse feeling powerful and in control. Now he was the last man standing, and he knew something had gone terribly wrong. A calm voice spoke from the shadows. "You should have done better research." The leader whirled around, trying to locate the source. "Who are you? What do you want?" The commander stepped into the weak light of the leader's phone. His face was calm, almost serene, but his eyes held an intensity that made the leader's blood run cold. "I'm the husband you thought was overseas," the commander said quietly. "And I want my wife." The leader's face went pale as understanding dawned. He looked at the military bearing, the controlled movements, and suddenly realized the magnitude of his mistake. This wasn't just any military husband. This was something else entirely. We didn't know," the leader stammered. "We thought you were deployed. We just wanted money. We weren't going to hurt her." The commander took another step forward. "You took my wife. You threatened her. You put her in danger." Each word was measured, controlled, but carried the weight of barely contained fury. The leader dropped his phone, raising his hands in surrender. "Please, we made a mistake. We'll leave town. We'll never come back. Just let us go." From behind the commander, the nurse emerged from the shadows. She walked calmly to her husband's side, showing no signs of the fear she had displayed earlier. The leader's eyes widened further as he realized she had been free all along. "You okay?" The commander asked his wife, never taking his eyes off the leader. I'm fine, she replied. He's the last one. The others are all down. The leader looked between them, finally understanding that he had been outmatched from the very beginning. His perfect plan had unraveled in minutes, and now he stood face to face with the consequences of his actions. Outside, vehicle doors slammed as the commander's backup team arrived. The leader could hear multiple footsteps approaching the warehouse. He knew his time was up. Please, he begged one last time, falling to his knees. We didn't know who we were dealing with. We'll do anything. Just don't. The commander pulled out a zip tie from his pocket. You'll do exactly what I say. And what you'll do is face justice for what you've done. As the backup team entered the warehouse, the leader remained on his knees, defeated and humiliated. The tables had completely turned. The predator had become prey, and the hunt was over. The commander looked at his wife, a small smile finally breaking through his stern expression. Let's go home, he said softly. She nodded, taking his hand. Breakfast is probably cold by now. And just like that, the nightmare was over. Justice would be served, but first, they would go home. The leader remained on his knees, his hands raised in surrender as the commander stood before him. The warehouse, once filled with the kidnappers' laughter and confidence, now echoed with the sound of approaching footsteps as the backup team secured the area. Please, the leader begged, his voice breaking. We didn't know. We thought your wife was just an easy target. We never meant for any of this to happen. The commander's expression remained unchanged as he secured the leader's hands with zip ties. His movements were precise and professional, showing no emotion despite the gravity of the situation. The backup team, led by the commander's former teammate, entered the main area of the warehouse. They were all former military, moving with the same quiet efficiency as the commander. Within moments, they had secured all the unconscious kidnappers and checked the perimeter. Area secure, the team leader reported. 4 suspects down, all breathing. No serious injuries. The nurse, true to her profession, was already moving among the fallen kidnappers, checking their vital signs. Despite what they had done to her, her medical training and compassion took over. She checked pulses, breathing, and made sure none of them were in immediate danger. They'll live, she announced calmly, looking up at her husband. But they'll need medical attention. Some bruising, possible concussions, but nothing life-threatening. The leader watched this display in disbelief. The woman they had kidnapped was now ensuring their well-being. It was a level of professionalism and humanity he couldn't comprehend. I don't understand, he muttered. We kidnapped you. Why are you helping us? The nurse stood up and looked at him directly. Because that's who I am, that's what I do. I help people even when they don't deserve it. The commander placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, pride evident in his eyes. Then he turned back to the leader. You want mercy? The commander asked quietly. Here's your mercy. You're alive, and you'll face justice through the legal system. That's more than you offered my wife. The sound of sirens began to fill the air as police cars approached the warehouse. The commander had called them as soon as the situation was under control. He believed in justice, not revenge. As the police entered the warehouse, the commander gave them a brief, professional report of what had happened. The officers were amazed at how efficiently the situation had been handled. 4 armed kidnappers had been neutralized without a single shot fired. The leader, now being helped to his feet by 2 officers, made one last plea. Please tell them we'll cooperate. We'll tell them everything. We'll return all the money we've ever taken. Just, please don't let them send us away for life. The commander looked at him one final time. That's not my decision to make. But I'll tell you this, you're lucky it was me who found you. Someone else might not have been so restrained. As the kidnappers were led away in handcuffs, each of them wore the same expression of shock and defeat. They had entered the warehouse as predators and were leaving as prisoners. The 7 minutes that had passed since their victim's husband arrived had completely destroyed their world. The backup team began packing up their equipment as the police took over the scene. The commander's former teammate approached him with a slight smile. 7 minutes, he said, shaking his head. You haven't lost your touch. The commander just nodded, his arm around his wife. Let's go home, he said to her. You must be exhausted. As they walked toward the warehouse exit, the nurse leaned into her husband. Thank you, she whispered. For what? He asked. For teaching me to defend myself. for coming for me, for being who you are." The commander stopped and looked at his wife, his stern expression finally softening completely. "I'll always come for you. Always." Behind them, the police were finishing up their crime scene investigation. The kidnappers were being loaded into police vehicles, each of them knowing they would spend many years regretting this morning's decisions. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the industrial district. For the commander and his wife, it was the dawn of a new day, one where they had faced danger together and emerged stronger. For the kidnappers, it was the beginning of a long period of reflection on why you should never underestimate anyone, especially not a Navy SEAL's wife. 3 months had passed since that fateful morning. The courthouse was packed with reporters and curious onlookers as the trial of the 4 kidnappers came to its conclusion. The commander and his wife sat quietly in the gallery, their hands intertwined as they listened to the judge deliver the final verdict. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the judge announced, "This court finds all 4 defendants guilty on multiple counts, including kidnapping, assault, and attempted extortion." The leader of the group, who had been so confident in that warehouse, now stood with his head bowed as the judge continued. The reality of spending the next 25 years in federal prison was sinking in. Throughout the trial, the story of the 7-minute rescue had captured national attention. News outlets across the country had picked up the incredible tale of how a Navy SEAL had rescued his wife in just 7 minutes, taking down 4 armed criminals without firing a single shot. But the commander and his wife had declined all interview requests. They weren't interested in fame or recognition, they simply wanted to return to their normal lives. Back at the hospital where the nurse worked, her colleagues treated her with a mixture of awe and respect. She had returned to her pediatric ward just a week after the incident, insisting that her young patients needed her. "The kids don't care about what happened," she told her supervisor. "They just want someone to hold their hand when they're scared." Her experience had given her an even deeper appreciation for her work. She understood fear in a way she never had before, and it made her even more compassionate with her frightened young patients. The commander continued his service, though his commanding officers had offered him time off. He preferred to stay busy, to maintain the discipline and routine that had served him so well throughout his career. At home, life slowly returned to normal. They still made breakfast together on weekends, still took evening walks in their neighborhood, still laughed at the same silly jokes. But there were subtle changes too. The nurse had started teaching self-defense classes at the community center, sharing the skills her husband had taught her with other women. The classes were always full, with waiting lists stretching months ahead. "I never thought I'd need these skills," she would tell her students. "But knowledge is power, and being prepared can make all the difference." The commander supported her classes, sometimes dropping by to demonstrate techniques or answer questions. Together, they had turned their traumatic experience into something positive for their community. As for the kidnappers, prison life was proving to be a harsh teacher. The leader, especially, spent many sleepless nights replaying those 7 minutes in his mind. He had entered the criminal world thinking he was smart, thinking he could pick easy targets and make quick money. Now he understood the true meaning of consequences. Word had spread quickly through the criminal underworld about what had happened. The story became a cautionary tale, whispered in prison yards and back alleys: "Never target a military family. You never know who you're really dealing with." 6 months after the incident, the commander and his wife celebrated their wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. As they sat on their back porch, watching the sunset, the nurse turned to her husband. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. The commander was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But mostly, I think about how lucky I am to have you in my life." She smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "I think we're both pretty lucky." And they were. They had faced one of the worst situations imaginable and had come through it stronger than ever. Their bond, already strong, had become unbreakable. As the stars began to appear in the evening sky, they sat in comfortable silence, grateful for each other and for the life they had built together. The 7 minutes that had changed everything were now just a part of their story, a reminder that sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones who fight for love, not glory. The 7-minute rescue would be remembered as a testament to training, preparation, and the unbreakable bond between 2 people who refused to be victims. and somewhere in a federal prison, 4 men would spend the next quarter-century learning that some targets should never be touched, and some lessons come at a very high price.